And so today we'll start going back to the Plato text to because we're going to move on to a new section today. We're almost finishing this part on the virtues and Damascus's commentary on the Phaedo.
Okay.
So right, it starts with at the end of the part that we were seeing, right? He commented, and we should know after he's died, we shall likely to be in the company of people of the same kind, and by our own efforts we shall know all that is pure, which is presumably the truth, for it is not permitted to the impure to attain to the pure. Such are the things, Simmias, that all those who love learning in the proper manner must say to one another and believe. Or do you not think so? I certainly do, Socrates. And if this is true, my friend, said Socrates, there is good hope that on the arriving where I'm going, if anywhere, I shall acquire what has been our chief occupation, our past lives, so that the journey that is now ordered for me is full of good hope, as it is also for any other man who believes that his mind has been prepared and, as it were, purified. So there's the first question that's raised about what is this hope, right? That he's talking about. What is this hope? Certainly is, said Simmias. And does purification not turn out to be what we mentioned in our argument some time ago, namely to separate the soul as far as possible from the body and to accustom it to gather itself and collect itself out of every part of the body and to dwell by itself as far as it can, both now and in the future, freed, as it were, from the bonds of the body? Certainly, he said. And that freedom and separation of the soul from the body is called death. That is altogether so. So here there are questions about what does it mean to separate and to be, and what is death, like separation from the body. And also, um, Damascus detects three stages here that he corresponds kind of to the three main kinds of virtue he's been mentioning, the political, purificatory, and contemplative. So to be free from the bonds of the body, to gather itself and collect itself from every part of the body, and to dwell by itself. Right? So he'll give an analysis of this. And it is only those who practice philosophy in the right way, we say, who always most want to free the soul. And this released separation of the soul from the body is the purification of the philosophers. So here there's an interesting thing that Plato uses a verb, uh, uh, Prometheo here, right, which is what where Prometheus comes from, which can mean to like to have providence, to exercise providence, to care about some things. And so this will cause a comment on Damascus and cause him to bring in Prometheus as well. Therefore, as I said at the beginning, it would be ridiculous for a man to trade himself in life, to live in a state as close as possible, as close to death as possible, and then to resent it when it comes. Ridiculous, of course. And this occasions questions about pleasure and grieving. In fact, Simmias, he said, those who practice philosophy in the right way are in training for dying. They fear death the least of all men. Consider it from this point of view. If they are altogether estranged from the body and desire to have their soul by itself, would it not be quite absurd for them to be afraid and resentful when this happens? If they did not gladly set out for a place where on arrival they may hope to attain that for which they had yearned during their lifetime, that is wisdom, and where they would be rid of the presence of that from which they are estranged. Many men, at the death of their lovers, wives, or sons, were willing to go to the underworld, driven by the hope of seeing there those for whose company they longed and being with them. Will then a true lover of wisdom, who has a similar hope and knows that he will never find it to any extent except in Hades, be resentful of dying and not gladly undertake the journey thither? One must surely think so, my friend, if he is a true philosopher, for he is firmly convinced that he will not find pure knowledge anywhere except there. And if this is so, then, as I said just now, would it not be highly unreasonable for such a man to fear death? Right? Um, so this is like seen as a second argument here with the comparison of the lovers and how lovers want to be with what is theirs. It certainly would by Zeus, he said. Then you have sufficient indication, he said, that any man whom you see resenting death was not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body, and also a lover of wealth or of honors, either of both. It is certainly as you say, right? So there's the first argument about welcoming death because you well, to put it crudely, you hate the body, you want to move away from it, it gets in the way of you knowing, and so on. And then there's a quick second argument here that you love wisdom and you want to be where wisdom is most easy to be had. Um, okay, so that's the text that I hope we get through today. And so if I'm correct, it starts on paragraph 125, is that right? Yeah, 125 on hope.
Okay, you got it. Okay, here. 120. Yeah, it's going in the other direction. I have to fix this. Okay. Oh, this is not working. There must be another way to do this. Okay, let's just do this. So 125. Corresponding to the two kinds of opinions, which may come from below or from above. I'm not sure. The one above, I guess, from the forms, and below from perception. The one certain, the one uncertain. There is a hope resulting from knowledge. Right. The kind referred to here. That's the hope that we saw. The um, uh,
We have a good hope.
yeah, it didn't say where like he gets this hope from, just because that's what purification is or something.
Right, well, he says if this is true, right, the whole argument that he just gave, there is good hope.
Hmm. Right. Okay. And then the second, as well as one derived from sense perception and surmise. It's really derived from like some kind of like rhetorical argument. Like if lovers, wouldn't you, if you're the lover of wisdom, wouldn't you want to be with your lover or something like even more than whoever wants to go to Hades to get their lovers or something like that?
Right, that's the argument at the end that we'll get
Yeah.
to later.
Okay.
Here the thing about hope, right? So he also was puzzled by the use of doxa at the beginning of the passage on the true philosophers. And there he said, well, doxa can just mean a claim, and then it can be like a claim justified by an argument. Also here, so hope would be like a claim about the future, right? A positive claim about the future. And that can again be founded on argument, or it can just be from sense perception.
Hmm.
He's kind of, I think, um, there are occasionally criticisms of hope from philosophers, right? So, like, even going all the way back to the myth of Pandora, right? That hope was the last remaining thing in the box. And like Stoic philosophers sometimes will talk about, hope is this thing that tricks human beings into always wanting more because they always hope they can, win the lottery and things like that. And so there is this like negative connotation of hope, and he wants to make it clear that it's not that because this is based on an argument. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's continue.
Okay. So 126. Separation is not the same thing as purification. The body, indeed, is not purified when separated from the soul, but rather it becomes unclean, what? And therefore causes uncleanness.
Right.
Um, confused.
So that's interesting, right? So he talked before about separation being, the same as purification, and because in general he's talking about the separation of the soul and the body, but here's like there's an objection, right? Which is that a dead body, a corpse, is a paradigmatically unclean thing, right? That you so also like you pollute. There are many stories about, oh, the temple was polluted or this place was polluted. Why? Because people were killed there. Right? This is a polluted place because they had death there. And So this is a reason to think that separation is not the same thing as purification. Um, but on the other hand, all this stuff about purification, purifying the soul, is separating it from the body. So what gives? The next paragraph will clean this up for us.
Okay, isn't this just, I mean, isn't the question like it's purificatory for the soul? Nobody ever said that it's purificatory for the body.
Well, no, but like when he defined death, he said it was a separation of the soul and the body, and both of them come to be by themselves. And um, and he also, he's gonna correct himself what he just said, where in one paragraph 124 he said, "Are pure and true identical?" As Plato says, pure means that a thing is separate from everything else, and true that is exactly what it is. Um, so. So yeah, he hasn't said that it's pure, its separation is pure for the body, but he hasn't made it clear that it is actually something that makes the body worse.
Hmm. Okay, so let's see. The statement made above, it also needs correction. He says 124. In current usage, thing does not become cleaner when it is separated from the superior. Current usage, meaning, not sure. The fact is expressed clearly in the sophist. Purification is, of course, keeping the rest while discarding anything that might be inferior. The curates took surround the creative gods because they stoop to a lower level of being.
So no, why he included this in current usage. There is nothing in the Greek here to suggest that why should he include that. The point is, however, that yeah, the meaning of the term implies that if you separate yourself from the superior things, you do not become cleaner, right? You um, becoming cleaner is separation from the inferior. It's not just any separation, but separation from the inferior. And this has to do with the fact that superior things, so things that are causes, they cause you to be what you are. And so to be joined to the superior things is to be more yourself, to be more true, to be more pure. Whereas to be joined to the inferior things is then to be less yourself, and they're to be mixed and polluted and so on. Therefore, the death, it separates the soul from the body, and the body from the soul. This purifies the soul, but it does not purify the body. Actually, it pollutes the body because, it's supposed to be a living organic body, right? And now it is, as it were, totally mixed up with inertness and, well, death, which is foreign to it, as what it's supposed to be. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. So that's the thing. The curates. So the curates are these gods. If I remember correctly, the curates. They are gods that they dance around and protect Zeus when he's growing up, if I remember correctly. And in the Platonic theology, in Proclus' Platonic theology, they show up as the purificatory gods in the intellectual realm. So it belongs to Nous to be demiurgic, to be creative, right? It's when it makes itself known, it also gives being to things. And this means that it has a connection with lower things that receive the forms. Therefore, Proclus argues that you also need these purificatory gods that explain why nous remains something separate, even when it has a causal relation to what is lower. And that's what these uh, and uh, and so there again, that's another case where it's clear that the problem, what needs purification or protection, is that there's a relationship to the lower, not to the higher, right? Being joined or mixed with higher things, that doesn't make you impure. Only being joined and mixed with lower things.
Right. In modern language, it says something like becoming more like yourself is only good if it's a better self. Otherwise, or you would say it's not really even becoming more like yourself. It's becoming more like your body, which is not yourself, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. There, um, Neoplatonists wouldn't think that someone who became more themselves and then became a serial killer really became themselves.
Right.
Mhm. Um,
Right. So, but like it's still like it's funny because I mean, I guess because of this, because like technically we could still speak of like purity as like something just being itself, like a pure, I don't know, pure poison is pure if it doesn't have anything good mixed into it. But then
hmm.
this is not the kind of purity that we care about or something.
Right, so you can say pure multitude, right? Which we encounter in the first proposition of the elements of theology, this thing that is purely multiple, it's only made out of multiples onto infinity. We can think of pure evil, right? And things like this. And the uh, late Neoplatonic view, of course, that these things are contradictions. You cannot apply pure in these cases. So pure multitude, we can't concede that such thing exists. And pure evil as well. Evil is always the perversion of some power which has a good end. And so there is no pure poison. Every poison has some function in nature. You just take it out of its proper context and then you use it to kill people. I think that's and so, every poison is also should be a drug that heals you from something.
Oh, okay. So you'd say something like, um, this dead body isn't a pure body. It's really a body less pure because it's now not really only a body. It's a body with some or somehow not in its proper place.
Yeah, so this body is not now pure body because the soul has abandoned it. Also, because it's um so a pure body is actually a body joined to the soul, right? A body that is alive, whose instruments are functioning well. Remember this Aristotelian point. If you sever a hand, what remains is not actually a hand because it can't be used as the instrument to grab things. And that's what a hand is. It's an instrument to grab things. And so and so like a pure hand would be actually like a hand that can, optimally grab things. This is the furthest possible from that. I mean, I guess maybe a pure hand would be something like a telekinetic ability, but like the pure hand would be our power of locomotion or something. I don't know. Now the body, yeah, we could say that it's been the corpse. The corpse is not a pure body. It's mixed up with, I mean, don't want to say death, but it's mixed up, I guess, with inorganic things, right? It's while we're living, we're trying to avoid returning to the earth and the dust and everything else. And now it's joined to that, right? And so in that sense, it's no longer pure. It's become polluted. Right?
Yeah, like so something like the purity that the chemist is searching for when he's like um, this purifying his elements is not the same kind of purity,
It's
or
not the
is
same.
it?
I mean, I think it's there's certainly an analogy, but um, I guess it's that case of, like you um, so he is trying to isolate that element and separate it from all the other elements. And that's like also, trying to figure out what is the form of something, what is the definition of something to separate it out from all the other things. Um, however, that, and I guess that is a kind of, that is a kind of purity, but it would be in some sense um, a lesser purity. And like of course, in order to you get these elements, you have to destroy things like on the macro level, right? And so that wouldn't be how you study those things purely, right?
Right. So something like the point that you made about the full body. So this like Platonic purity cannot be achieved by breaking apart wholes. It's actually more, you're actually more pure, or even more yourself when functioning as part of the whole that you're part of. Just like a hand is more of a hand when it's connected to the body than when it's disconnected. So if a chemist is isolating some element, at least relative to like a greater form or something, he's really studying something broken, which then would be weird to call pure because it doesn't even work as what it is just by itself.
Right. And so he's actually studying something that belongs, let's say, to I mean, the whole things start to get complicated. So, um, as long as I'm alive, I'm separate, let's say, from the world of the elements, right? Uh, and the world of like inorganic things. And and the and when I die, I in some sense join that, but I mix it with that. So my purity, my purity, the purity of my body, is what in some sense keeps me separate from that larger whole in the sense that it, takes up more space, it's more extended. Um, but when I join that larger whole, I am in through death, I am separating myself from, let's say, the causally prior whole, which is, the whole of souls, right? The whole of and so this has to do with, the prior in the causal chain, the smaller in extension, right? So when the chemist breaks something apart to understand the element itself, then he's in some sense integrating this into the, let's say, the biggest whole there is, which is the whole of just like material stuff, right? But he's taken it out of the more causally structured holes that it was a part of before. You know?
Okay. So this all goes back to the same question of like, is the higher or what is the higher and the lower? Like for Platonism,
Right.
the always the what answers the question of what you are or what is more causal is the like it's more proper for a body to be a living body than the things it's made out of, which are the dead things somehow.
Yeah, and you can see that there's like a tension here when we start talking about parts and wholes, since purity is has to do with separation, then it seems that, for you to get the pure part, it has to lose its place in the whole, right? Something like that.
That, but for that, we you say one of these kind of things where like the higher things are actually both more separate and more integrated. Like they're more themselves, and by being more themselves, they become more part of the whole that they belong to, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, so that has to do also with the question about what does the Titanic life have to do? Is it just involvement with the body? Well, Damascus says no, because also like when you separate yourself from your higher causes and your higher wholes, like when you say, no, I'm like this free-thinking individual and I don't belong to some god or to some city, then that also is separate. I mean, that's also Titanic, right? That's like as it were, a wrong purity, something like that. A wrong separation. Um, and so things can go, yeah, it's a question often of perspective, and of course there is a normative perspective for that the causally prior is the more true, is more real. But um, um, can we continue?
Yeah. Okay, good. Right. I mean, there's also people that will say that the material is more causally prior. And then that's a different.
So that's a different discussion.
Yeah. Okay. 127. Okay. So now death. So really, like something like this death that Socrates makes death into like a good thing, it's really only half of death, or like only death on the part of the soul, because the body actually does get worse by death.
Yeah, and we saw something here at the a few paragraphs ago where he also specified that it was perfect death. Um, that was what the philosopher was after. We let me find it. Yeah, I'm can't find it immediately right now, but he's gonna return to this question. Oh, here it was in paragraph 101, right? When he was commenting on the trail or the path of the true philosophers, right? Um, if the philosopher detaches himself from the body and thus enters into contact with the truth, he can enjoy this truth completely only by complete detachment. And so there has to be a trail, right, towards there. And then he says, this is the gift bestowed by perfect death. And in view of this, it is obvious that such a death will be welcome when it comes, right? Um, And then I explained this by saying that it probably has to do with this idea that, if you haven't purified yourself by the time that you die, then you will like haunt your grave as a ghost and you will be reborn as an animal. So and he's gonna so now return to this question when he says that death is not identical with purification.
Okay, right. That's what I was. 127. Death is not identical with purification. Only the death that detaches from the inferior is. 4. Death is a process of separation, as it was said in the definition given above. This is why we speak of death from above and death from below. I'm not sure what that means, like separating from above and separating from below. Um,
We'll get to that.
okay.
Read to
Is being separate identical then with being dead? No. For the latter, being dead, follows a period of union, which union is dissolved by death, but you can be separate without having ever been mixed with the body. But there is a permanent separation. But if there is permanent separation, there is permanent dissolution and permanent death. Then what difference is there between death and otherness? I don't know what otherness is here. Death severs mutual relations, and so those other things must exist already. And what has death still to do with life? That both inclination towards a thing and withdrawal from it are vital processes. I'm so confused. Now it is relations of this kind that are severed by death.
Right. So here there are like a bunch of questions. There's like this give and take about what is death and um so right. So first of all, only death that detaches from the inferior. So again, it's not just any death, it has to be a death that, like follows on a purificatory life. We can think about like what would be a death that separates the body from the inferior. I think that's kind of like Iamblichus's account of sacrifice, right? Where we saw that he said that the sacrifice, especially because it uses fire, it returns the form of the animal back to its daimon and its god and its causes. So in some sense, sacrifice is supposed to return maybe the form of the body back to its causes and separate it. Um, and connected to this in the Odyssey, right, we saw this I'm sorry, in the Iliad. We saw this in the course on the sixth essay on Plato's Republic. There's the scene of the funeral pyre of Patroclus, which Proclus interprets as a symbol of some kind of theurgic rite for like the soul to go back. And perhaps this is also something that would separate the body from what is inferior. Um, and then he says, well, separation, right? Then there's a question, what's the distinction between death and separation? Well, the death, you were once connected, but there are things that are permanently separate, like noose, right? Noose is never, right? And then there's things like if there's permanent separation, then there's permanent dissolution, permanent death. Um, Presumably, like, what is the um well, the here they well, that's curious. So like the soul in some sense is never totally separate from the body because it will transmigrate and return to bodies again and again. But maybe we can think of like that body will never be reanimated by the soul, so they don't talk about like resurrection, right? So maybe on the side of the body, then that would be permanent death, right? The then and then there's another question. What is the difference between death and otherness? So, um, like, what is the difference between A being different from B? Um, and then his answer here is that um, death severs the mutual relationships. Um, and the mutual relations. So those other things must exist already. Presumably, so death is not just that there are two distinct things, that they become distinct, but that they also no longer have relations one to another. And then finally, um, what does death still have to do with life? Right? Because way back he understood death as also something to do with life because it's what gives something a higher life, right? Um, so here from the point this is paragraph 62 from the point where the differentiation among the gods begins, there's a descending scale of death as the principle that bestows the life of the prior upon the secondary. So that even after the procession, the product is in its cause the reversion, the reverting entity being, as it were, stripped of its own life. And um, so here he says then that it is still a withdrawal from the living body, and so it has something to do with life, right? It's the soul departing from the body, and so it's actually a vital activity. Right, this is also part of like we saw this when he was distinguishing between the death that the philosophers want and the death that the many understand. And the many understand death as a passion, as something that happens to you and something that takes away life. Whereas philosophers understand death as something that the soul does, right? That they're doing now and that the soul will completely do at the moment that they die. So this is like just a series of like little questions about death.
Mhm.
Because he mentioned it again in the text.
Okay, so now,
Yeah.
first, 128. First, the soul must constitute an image of herself in the body. That is what animating the body means. Secondly, she must be in sympathy with her phantom because of the likeness, so this image. Since every form is drawn towards its replica as a result of its innate concentration upon itself. Thirdly, having entered into the divided body, she must be torn asunder with it and end in utter disintegration. Until, through a life of purification, she gathers herself from a dispersed state, unties the bonds of sympathy, and actualizes the primal life within her that exists by itself without the phantom.
Okay, so this is, as it were, an argument for the three moments of, as it were, the purificatory life, starting from three moments in how the soul can give life to a body. Um, and so first it says the soul must constitute an image of herself in the body, and that is what animating the body means. So that's interesting because so animating the body in Greek it can also it's psychosaitos to soma. So the verb if we were to as it were translate it um morphologically would be like souling the body, which is what animating is. It has anima in there, right? So you're souling the body. So giving life to the body is actually producing, as it were, an image. It's like imagining yourself in a body. So this is like the first step for entering a body. And you're not yet inside the giving life immediately to the body here. You just have an image, and this is what the putting forth the pneumatic vehicle is, right? Pneumatic body. That is this image that you produce. It's this representation of yourself as in a body, right? And then here I disagree with the translator with how he did this. He says, secondly, she must be in sympathy with her phantom because of the likeness. So her phantom, which is also her image here, I mean, it can also be translated like that. It's in the dative, and we can understand that not just as with her phantom, but through her phantom, right? So through having a representation of herself in the body, she then has sympathy with the body, right? Because of the similarity between the two things, right? So this image that we have of ourselves in a body is what connects us to the body, right? So it's both what makes the soul enter the body and also what gives life to the body. So this is what connects the two things. So that, for instance, when the soul wants something, like to raise a hand, then the body's hand is raised, right? So what's uh, the medium between these two things is our representation of ourselves. Right? And then once she is in the body, because she imagines herself in it, then she becomes dispersed, right? Then she has so again, there's the Dionysian image here of being torn apart, but also that, then she gets affected by what happens in each part of her body, and she gets separated into all these desires that have to do with different parts of the body, right? And five senses and all that. And so, in order for the soul to, and so in order for the soul to undo this, so first of all, um, she has three things. First, she gathers herself from her dispersed state. So this is to, have then not a life with these conflicting desires about connected to different body parts or different bodily capacities. And so this corresponds to civic virtue, right? It's harmonizing all our passions, but not getting rid of them yet. We're not distinguishing ourselves. And then she unties the bonds of sympathy. That's the second thing. And so this is the part of purificatory virtue. And here we can see like a bit about like what pure connection of like pure purificatory virtue in the sense of you don't take the senses and pleasure and pain of the body as your guide, and what we sometimes read about purifying the pneumatic body. So like the step for you to disidentify with your body is also that you stop imagining yourself as in the body, right? You imagine yourself as something else that, is trapped in the body or something like that. So you have a different imagination of yourself, a different representation of yourself. And then, um, I guess until you get to like the pure representation of yourself, which is just as a star, right? Just as your pure astral body. Um, And then you actualize the primal life within her that exists by itself without the phantom. So then you do what you can without needing any body, without imagining yourself as body, which is, pure thought, right? The pure noesis. And and so like this interesting thing about the contemplative life here. So the contemplative life has to do with doing something where you don't imagine yourself in a body doing it, right? That's kind of the idea. So you're on the idea is like when you're following an argument or something, you don't need to think of like I am now sitting in a chair reading a book and following this argument, but rather you can this is an activity that you do without a self-perception, self-imagination of that kind, right? And then that's the contemplative life, and then that's the concludes the purificatory process, right? And so this is like a really neat I think, systematization and gives us clues into how they understand that the body gets life. Um, do you have a question or
Yeah. Does this sound a little like the predictive processing accounts of action? Like first you imagine it having been done, and then that somehow causes the emotory part of the brain or something to do it, and then I guess then there's the reversion is um like they check, oh, that wasn't actually done correctly, or it's like whole this whole like thing, like there's like the
Oh no, I don't know these predictive processing accounts, but they do sound like really really close to this indeed. Like in contemporary references, what I must think of is the Matrix, right? So there's that scene where he's plugged into into a computer program for the first time, and after he came out of the Matrix, and then he's shocked to find, oh, this is my body, and it's like, yeah, because his mind automatically puts forth this image of his body, right? And since he normally thinks of himself as having hair, he shows up having hair,
Mm.
and and so it's that idea that there's like this like we interface through the body through this self-representation. And I didn't know that there were contemporary theories like that, but that makes sense. Like
Yeah,
the
like there's
reason.
like the you have to there's also like people that have you call it phantom limbs, right? The people that lose a limb and then
Right.
still think that they do, and like might even have like sensations in it because like it's still in your how the Platon is called, in your pneumatic body it still exists.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how they put it. That's how they put it. Exactly. Um and and yeah, and so the stuff about purifying your pneumatic body is you working on this like automatic self-image that you put out.
Right. You could also like make it worse, like if you like identify with your car or something, or like it's almost like the sense, like an extension of your senses or something.
Right. Or, you identify with your cell phone and you imagine yourself having a cell phone in your hand all the time. And also, yeah, so in some sense, the it's also like where your very ingrained habits, right? And the things that you really want, that's their seat, right? So it's the seat of the imagination also for these long-lasting desires. And of course, that's a reason to. So like it's also not necessarily the case co. that we imagine ourselves immediately as this body, right? That has to do also with the with that thing we talked about it the other day about how like maybe the person the purifying life has the healthiest body, and so you can imagine like that the person who's, really engaged in the life of pleasures, then like in their pneumatic body, it's maybe a too plastic way of putting it, but like their belly is like really big and things like that. And of course, then that they have like body dysmorphia in the sense that, oh, like I should be able to eat as much as I want, but then sometimes I feel sick. And there it's like because their pneumatic body is they represent themselves as something that can absorb lots. And so in that sense, there can be this kind of um, mismatch. And also, I mean, uh, we say it like as a self-image in the sense that it's something that's put forth by them, and that's how they give life to the body. But it's not necessarily self-image in the sense of what they what they realize when they do introspection, because they can do introspection poorly and not realize that, right? And they think that, oh no, I'm perfectly at peace with how I am, but they're just lying to themselves. Um, so yeah, that's the case here. In the next paragraphs, 129 and 130, he's going to give us some mythic parallels for this process.
Mhm. So the myth, uh, perfect myth, describes the same events as taking place in the prototype of the soul. So like whichever form or something is the cause of souls. When Dionysus has projected his reflection into the mirror, he followed it and was thus scattered over the universe. Apollo gathers him and brings him back to heaven, for he is the purifying God and truly is the savior of Dionysus. Therefore, he is celebrated as the Dionysus giver.
Right. So there's a so the myth here is this myth that Dionysus was crowned king, the Titans were unhappy, they seduce him with a mirror, he's looking into the mirror, and then they grab him and rip him apart. Apollo, saves especially his heart, and then from that heart he is reborn through Zeus. And so, in that sense, this whole myth of Dionysus is a model, right? Is a prototype for the embodiment of the soul, right? And they both have to do with, and Apollo is the purifying god. So this has to do with a etymology of Apollo as it has the apo, right? Away from, and also pola, many in it. So what takes you away from multiplicity. Um, Besides Apollo sometimes being associated with medicine and things like that. He's the one who shoots from afar, so his action is at a distance, is separate from its object. And since he shoots, he has poison, and because it's poison, he also causes medicine. So there are all these, and besides Apollo, association of Apollo with wisdom. So in all these ways, he's the purifying god and also the truly savior of Dionysus. The note here has an interesting thing about how, like Pausanias, who has this like description of Greece with and describes like temples and religious practices in a bunch of places. He mentions a specific altar which has something that could be Dionysus, the gift of Dionysus, but also the Dionysus giver. And remarks that like contemporary scholars think that it's the gift of Dionysus, but Proclus might be right that it's actually Dionysus giver that's meant. So that's interesting. I I wonder what the puzzle that this paragraph is for me is this in the prototype. So he specifies in the prototype of the soul, but in the Greek it's just in the prototype, in the model. Um, And in what sense then is um, the Dionysus the model? I mean, it could be just that, the intelligible world in general is the model of the perceptible world. That could be the idea. But it because the model, of course, is typically phanes, is the living being itself of that's the model for the world in the Timaeus, when you just see the model without further qualification. So that's a question exactly, like what he means by saying that it's also present in the model.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, yeah, and now and so this has to do with being rended apart and being joined together. Or actually, that's it's an interesting question. Then, so here he doesn't attribute it exactly to one of those stages in the life of purification, but now in 130, he's going to give different myths for each of the stages.
Hmm. Okay. So 129, yeah, 130, sorry, this is 120. Um, so 130. Like Kore, the soul descends into Genesis. Like Dionysus, she is scattered by generation. Like Prometheus and the Titans, she is chained to the body. She frees herself by acquiring the strength of Hercules, gathers herself through the help of Apollo and of Athena the Savior, i.e., by truly purifying philosophy, and she elevates herself to the causes of her being with Demeter.
Right. So here we have two other myths besides that of Dionysus and Apollo. So there's the one of Cora and Demeter, right? So also, Cora is also another name for uh, Persephone, right? So Cora just means the maiden, right? The girl. So she was taken by Hades and then made to eat a pomegranate in Hades, and therefore she uh, spends part of her life in Hades and part of her life above. And Demeter is, Demeter through her grief, she's the one that, forced Zeus to do something about it and talk to his brother Hades and have her come up again. Um, and Prometheus and the Titans, right? So Prometheus, he brings the soul down, he brings fire down to human beings, which is interpreted by Proclus in another text as bringing the rational soul down to animals, right? And then because of that, he was, punished by Zeus and chained to a rock where his liver was eaten every day. But Hercules eventually comes along and saves him, right? He saves him from that. So here there's, and so he says that the myth of Kore and Demeter is about this first thing of the soul descending into Genesis. So it's this first thing about creating an image of herself in the body, right? That is, and so this creating an image of herself, and then also putting forth the primal life within her that exists by itself without the phantom. This is represented by the myth of Persephone, the which is also the myth, right, celebrated at the Eleusinian mysteries, Eleusis. Um, then Dionysus and Apollo, that's this part about gathering gathering herself from her dispersed state, and so this and like being separated and also gathering herself. Here it's interesting that the order is different, right? In some sense, because right, it should actually be that because she first descends into Genesis, she first makes the image of herself, and then she is bound by the bonds of sympathy. So after Corey, actually Prometheus and the Titans should come, and then Dionysus is to do with being scattered in the body. I think the reason he doesn't do this is because Dionysus has to be equated with a purificatory life and not with a civic life. So that's why the order here is different. But in any case, so in this case, he sees Dionysus, the myth of Dionysus about separating yourself from the body, and Prometheus and the Titans then is about and being freed by Hercules would be about acquiring civic virtue, which makes sense with Hercules is this his with his labors, they're like civilizing labors, and Prometheus, he's also someone who brings knowledge to people and so on. So that it makes sense that there's this, and he brings the arts. So it's a very something to do with our embodied life. So that makes sense that these are have to do with this with Prometheus and Hercules have to do with political virtue, Dionysus and Apollo with purificatory, Chloe and Demeter with contemplative virtue. Um,
Okay. Um,
yeah, I mean, there's nothing really that uh will that has yeah, nothing really argumentative here that sheds light on the argument.
mhm. Yeah, these all seems like finding these images where like that match to these stages of
Yeah, I wonder. So there are these core is in the uh these might all be connected with what are called the hypercosmic gods. So there are choric gods and there are Apollonian gods there, but there isn't really um Dionysus isn't there. So yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, uh, I thought there might be a metaphysical connection, but I don't see it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, okay. Um, so let's continue. 131. Here's another picture that I forgot how it works. The syllogism can be constructed as follows. So the philosopher, so there's this, I'm not sure what the
right,
syllogism is of.
you read this by doing. Oh, let me read it for you, and that's easier. So the philosopher purifies himself. That's the first premise. Whoever purifies himself frees himself from the body. Whoever frees himself from the body separates himself. Whoever separates himself prepares for death. Therefore, the philosopher prepares himself for death.
Mm,
Right.
yeah,
So he's just reconstructing the argument for
yeah,
us.
that seems to be what it says. It just gets us from this like it doesn't really change like it just gets us from the definition of separation to that meaning death. To,
Yeah, exactly. And it's because that's what Socrates is trying to convince his friends of.
right. Okay. Like as we saw, there's some sense in which that's only like a certain kind of death, and therefore it's like calling that death. It's like there's some words games here a little bit.
There might be some word games, or yeah, well,
Like once you have to say the true death or something like that, perfect death, then you know,
but the true death is just the death that you prepared for.
right?
So there is something like, um, I mean, there, you can also just substitute the last prepares for death with dies the true death.
Hmm. Okay. 132. Only to those who practice philosophy in the right way, those are the people that have this hope, right? That is to say, steadfastly and in a spirit of purification. Their own deliverance is a matter of intense and incessant care. The care, Promethea, coming to them from Prometheus. The constancy and intensity from Hercules, like the strength thing. For it is to unceasing endeavor that the effort of liberation owes its strength. Hmm.
Yeah, here it's more, he starts to mix things. So maybe it's not, he doesn't mean to keep those three myths so tightly apart because the deliverance, right? We saw him say, Dionysus is the god of deliverance that delivers. But here he's saying, well, he saw this word, right? Promethuntai, right? And says, oh, so it's talking about Prometheus as well. So, I mean, that's kind of the argument. I mean, that's kind of what he's doing here. Um, yeah, so here, so yeah, this desire to separate themselves is from Prometheus, but Hercules is the one that actually makes it possible to separate them, right? So gives them the strength necessary to free, to not care about the body. Um, and now his is another point of detail. Or rather, he's going to uh, talk about this question about, oh, we should be happy about death. We shouldn't be sad about it.
Hmm. Okay. We grieve, 133, we grieve both when we lose the good and when we encounter evil. Okay, makes sense. Consequently, we rejoice both when we are delivered from evil and we find the good. On both scores, we should rejoice at death because it sets us free from the detested body, that's the evil, as well as because it enables us to enjoy the truth for which we longed. Okay.
So those are the two
Like,
sides
yeah.
uh, of the previous argument. There was the argument of despising pleasures, and there was the argument of wanting to know the forms.
Oh, okay. 134, fire can be made to sink down by a certain compulsion and artificially. But of its own nature, it tends upwards because its totality is also there, like the fire and the, how do you call it? Um, this is what happens to the soul too, in its descent into the body and its return to reality. Because in this case too, the transcendent totality is yonder, there.
Right. So, yeah, the totality of fire. The totality of fire is, I mean, so again, there's this idea of, these concentric circles, the heavens, and then there's fire, air, water, earth. Fire here isn't, something that's in flame, right? It's not, we don't look at the sky and see that there's fire burning, but rather it's a very flammable substance, right? So the idea, and that's up there, and that we see because of comets, right? So comets, since the Platonists follow Aristotle in not thinking that comets were part of the heavens, because they start and stop, right? And they didn't see them recurring didn't have these didn't follow specific comments and say like, oh, Halley's comet is coming back and so along. And so they thought, oh, it must belong to the sublunar world. So it's part of the fire up there catching flame and then stopping. Right? That's what
Mm.
happened. That's what a comet is. And when we see a flame, the flame goes up because this very flammable substance, it's going up, and that's what gives like the direction of the flame, right? Um, and so that's uh, what he means when fire wants to return to its own totality. It says that the soul too, it sends into the body and then it wants to go back. So this implies first that the body is that the soul is artificially and with violence brought down, right? So this artificially can be like the Greek can be like by a certain scheme, right? And so there might be there's something that has some trickery involved. Um, and again, there are positive and negative ways of seeing why the soul comes down. standard Proclean view, which is positive, is that it comes down to exercise providence. But you can also think of this as a certain contrivance, a certain scheme of the gods to get the soul to come down because they needed to animate all the animals, right? Even the ones that it would rather not. Um, it's but Proclus also disagrees because Proclus also thinks that it's unnatural for the soul to be down here. So like there's comparisons of this lunar world with a swamp that's toxic and there are a bunch of diseases here, or also that we are here in the body as if it were on a ship on a raging sea. Where you are Odysseus and things like that. So the that makes sense, this idea. And then it wants to join. What does it want to join? He translates as the transcendent totality. So this is the separate totality. I mean, it could be right, but the soul doesn't belong to the intelligible. But it does want to be in the company of other souls. And when it's in the heavens, right, we talked about how the heavenly bodies, of course they have bodies, but they don't pay attention to them. They're just paying attention to their thoughts, right? So presumably the souls there are just paying attention to other souls and soul things and stuff like that. So if you ask where they are in the sense of where their attention is, it would be, in the totality of soul, right? And so that's what the soul wants. So yeah, so the point here, I guess, is that this whole thing of purification is just this applied to the soul, this more general metaphysical truth that things want to return to their totalities.
And
And
unlike even
this,
nature in the sense of like fire.
yeah, and this again agrees with that question about um, wholes and parts and impurity. Right? So here, becoming pure is joining the truer whole.
Right. Okay.
Uh,
Uh, 135. The second argument is a fortiori reasoning and is meant to convince outsiders that it would be people that are not philosophers that it would be ridiculous for philosophers to be annoyed at the prospect of death.
the second argument is the one about the lover.
Right. How did this convince them? Something just like, well, you love your lovers and we love thoughts, so therefore it should make sense to you.
Well, it's like
Or so much more
these
because,
guys say they love wisdom, don't they? They should want to be with wisdom, right?
right? Seemed like the Socrates juries agreed. However, it seems likely that this argument too is intended for philosophers who live in accordance with reason, proving to them that even the rational soul detaches itself from the body when it hopes to find the object of its love in its hereafter, in the hereafter. So to be assertive thing that this faculty, while existing in the rational soul, which is incapable of reverting upon itself, is absent from rational soul, though it can revert both upon itself and upon reality.
This is quite interesting. So, there are irrational passions that transcend death, right? Therefore, reason should be able to, want to transcend death as well. You so like a person who's crazy about the person they love, right? Like the object of their erotic passion, they want to, even die for them, and they want to like go leave the body. So if the and however, that's like insane for them because they can't. So he says that it is incapable of reverting upon itself. If it's incapable of reverting upon itself, it's incapable of existing separately, regardless,
Mm.
and for class as well. And so it's like that would be death for them, right? Because they would leave the body and then they would no longer have existence. And he says, but so the rational soul should also do that, right? Like even with even more right, it should be able to walk dead. Um, so that's this uh question. Now
So,
he
I mean, is it possible to meet your lover in Hades, or is that like just an impossible fantasy?
so actually, there are I mean it is possible because after we die we still have our pneumatic bodies, right?
Hmm.
And the pneumatic bodies have our memories, and so it would still be, in some sense, the same individual. And yeah, and it's this kind of desire to be with your lover and stuff, which then leads you to keep transmigrating. Right?
Okay. So it's like only irrational in that it's
Oh, well, and that is, motivated by motivated by a passion that's not caused by reasons.
Mhm. Okay. 136. If a man is a philosopher, he is fearless in the face of death. If he is not fearless, he is not a philosopher. The inference is valid because made by negation, because made by negation and conversion.
Right. What we call taking the contrapositive.
Okay, just the other side of that thing. Okay. On the other hand, if a man is fearless, right, it doesn't convert the other way. If a man is fearless, is not necessarily a philosopher. For the negation of the consequent makes the conversion valid because of the resulting negation of the antecedent. But its affirmation does not apply affirmation of the antecedent. This is probably all that the syllogism is meant to convey.
Right. Just going over some logic with his students.
Okay. Yeah, but that's simple, I think, right?
Yeah, let me
Um,
just check the text if there was reason to be um uh um one was it yeah, no, there's also no reason the text I would read it another way. But yeah.
okay. Um, I mean, I guess those people, those like lovers who maybe are fearless, are still not philosophers or something.
Right, and there and like soldiers, of course, and things like that.
Mhm. 137. Why does Plato fail to mention pleasure seeking? Where does he fail to mention it? I'm not sure. When a
Here
lover
at the
here.
at the end, let me share here. I also think that like the people who are afraid of
Oh, okay, he said lover.
people who are not afraid of death and call themselves philosophers, or they shouldn't, are Christians. They say,
Oh, okay.
we vanquished death because we trust in the true philosopher Christ. Um, and yeah, so here at the end, then if you have sufficient indication, he said that any man whom you see resenting death was not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body, and also a lover of wealth or of honors, either of both. This really, as you say, that's the thing.
Mhm.
So why doesn't he mention love of pleasure here? Right? That's a
I
question.
see. Since the lover of body obviously would be a love pleasure seeker too. And an answer is that he is the lover of the body. And the others I mentioned separately. So maybe the lover of the body is the lover of pleasure, and then the wealth and honors are not other things. You didn't really say, you just said it presents death, but okay. Um, or that he has been dealt with above, and the present passage mentions only those omitted then. Not sure.
Right. Because remember there was this question about why doesn't he mention honors here? Right.
Oh,
Um,
okay, right. So now this is just now we can put both questions together and say like, well, it's just sometimes he does this and sometimes he does that. Okay. This is Hypercratio's interpretation. Batterius escapes the difficulty by saying that a man who pretends to be a philosopher, okay, does so for the sake of either of honor or of gain, so like the sophists. None, however, for the sake of pleasure, because of the severe attitude philosophy imposes. In that case, this man is being understood to apply not to the lover of the body, but to the sham philosopher.
Uh, right. So he doesn't mention the love of pleasure because like no one does this for pleasure.
Hmm. Right. Okay. Okay. By this interpretation, we avoid another problem too. How can the man who seeks honor be a lover of the body, since he is willing to sacrifice it for the sake of honor? I don't know who was saying here. The commentator's solution of this is rather weak, and it seems that he has forgotten the explanation of Batterius, which was the second. The first, against with the objection that was raised, was hypercritios. What's going on? I don't know.
Yeah. So um, Damascius. Uh, so the first solution is uh, so there's one solution which is the pleasure seeker is the lover of the body. The second is that he mentions the things of um he mentions the things he talked about this before. Now he's just mentioning the things he forgot. And then the third is that it's just about the man who pretends to be a philosopher, and therefore it doesn't make sense to mention pleasure because no one does this for pleasure. Damascus prefers this third one, because the second one, which seems to be Damascus prefers this third one because it also solves how can the man who seeks honor be a lover of the body since he's willing to sacrifice it uh, for the sake of honor. So let's go back to the text here. Any man who misuse it was not a lover of wisdom, but a lover of the body, and also a lover of wealth or honors, either or both. So he separates the two, the lover of body. Um, I also think
No,
that
or you could do
maybe,
both, I guess. Either or both.
yeah, I'm also thinking that I'd have to sit down and check. I think Damascus is also taking the syntax differently than the translator here.
Hmm.
Um, and and Damascus thinks that Proclus' solution that he's just mentioning what he forgot to mention. The other point is rather weak, and indeed it doesn't really explain it. Just says, oh, it's already been dealt with. Um,
Right.
so so yeah,
I mean, it seems like
and
the fake philosopher thing makes sense because like he seems to be attacking someone. Like
yeah, yeah, it makes sense. So, as you can tell from the text, or the next section is the general survey on the virtues, which is our big,
that's
it's
wow.
um, from
We're back.
paragraph 138 to 144. He gives us the stepwise all of the scale of virtues, where they are discussed in Plato. And but this is also the start of commenting on the next passage of the text. So we'll leave that for next week.
Okay.
Okay. This
Got it.
was fun.
All right. That's very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll see you in a week.
26. Yeah,
Bye.
we'll be. Thank you.